Welcome to History Recapped. Today we're diving deep into one of the most complex, tension-filled and defining eras of the 20th century, the Cold War. Spanning over 4 decades, this ideological conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union shaped global alliances, fueled proxy wars, and brought the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation. This is the story of the Cold War. The Cold War's foundations were laid not only on the geopolitical aftermath of World War II, but also on deep-rooted ideological opposition and psychological warfare. Propaganda became a powerful weapon. In the United States, media, schools, and government institutions promoted the threat of a global communist takeover. Anti-communist films, books, and campaigns like McCarthyism stoked public fear and suspicion. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union used propaganda to portray capitalism as exploitative and imperialistic, painting the US as the aggressor intent on encircling the USSR. Parallel to these ideological campaigns, the intelligence apparatuses of both nations began expanding rapidly. The United States established the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, in 1947, tasked with gathering foreign intelligence and conducting covert operations. The Soviet Union had its own formidable agency, the KGB, responsible for espionage, counterintelligence, and internal surveillance. These agencies became key players in the Cold War chessboard, orchestrating coups, espionage rings, and psychological operations to undermine each other's global influence. While the US and the Soviet Union had been uneasy allies during World War II, their alliance quickly soured. The US championed capitalism and democracy. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, promoted communism and authoritarianism. As the war ended in 1945, tensions rose, Europe was devastated, and 2 superpowers emerged with very different visions for the post-war world. The Yalta and Potsdam conferences, held between Allied leaders, highlighted these growing divisions. The Soviets took control of much of Eastern Europe, establishing satellite states in Poland, East Germany, Hungary, and others, forming what Winston Churchill famously called the Iron Curtain. In 1947, President Harry Truman announced the Truman Doctrine, pledging US support to countries threatened by communism. This was the beginning of the US policy of containment aimed at preventing the spread of Soviet influence. It marked a dramatic shift in American foreign policy, from isolationism to proactive global involvement. The Marshall Plan followed shortly after, providing over $13 billion to help rebuild Western European economies. While it was an act of economic assistance, it also served to prevent the spread of communism by stabilizing democratic governments. The Soviet Union saw the Marshall Plan as an act of economic imperialism and pressured Eastern Bloc countries to reject the aid. In 1948, the first major Cold War crisis unfolded. The Soviets blockaded West Berlin in an attempt to force the Western Allies out of the city. In response, the US and Britain organized the Berlin Airlift, supplying the city with food, fuel, and medicine by air for almost a year. Planes landed every few minutes at the height of the operation. The blockade failed, and West Berlin remained under Western control. This event became a potent symbol of Western commitment to resisting Soviet pressure. In 1949, the United States and its Western allies formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance committed to mutual defense. In 1955, the Soviet Union established the Warsaw Pact in response, aligning Eastern European nations under its military and ideological control. This formalized the division of Europe and institutionalized the Cold War standoff. The Cold War was marked by an intense arms race. In 1949, the Soviets successfully tested their first atomic bomb, ending the US monopoly on nuclear weapons. Both nations developed increasingly powerful hydrogen bombs and intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs. The threat of mutual assured destruction, MAD, loomed large. Civil defense programs emerged, including fallout shelters and air raid drills in American schools. Parallel to the arms race was the space race. In 1957, the USSR launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. The US responded by establishing NASA. In 1969, the US achieved a major propaganda victory by landing astronauts on the moon. In 1950, the Cold War turned hot in Korea. North Korea, backed by the Soviets and China, invaded South Korea. The US and other United Nations forces intervened. After intense fighting, the front stabilized near the 38th parallel. An armistice was signed in 1953. The Korean War resulted in millions of casualties and left the Korean peninsula divided to this day. The closest the world ever came to nuclear war was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. After US reconnaissance discovered Soviet missiles in Cuba, President John F. Kennedy imposed a naval blockade. For 13 tense days, the world watched as the two superpowers edged toward catastrophe. Ultimately, the Soviets agreed to remove their missiles from Cuba in exchange for a US promise not to invade the island and a secret deal to remove American missiles from Turkey. Another major Cold War conflict was the Vietnam War. The US supported South Vietnam against the Communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh. Despite massive military investment, the US could not defeat the guerrilla tactics of the Viet Cong. The war sparked widespread protest in the US and ended in 1975 with the fall of Saigon. The 1970s saw a period of reduced tensions, known as détente. Presidents Nixon and Ford, along with Soviet leaders, engaged in diplomatic talks. Treaties like SALT I and the Helsinki Accords aimed to limit nuclear weapons and improve East-West relations. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan to support a communist government. The US responded by supplying weapons to Afghan Mujahideen fighters and boycotting the 1980 Moscow Olympics. The war dragged on, becoming a costly quagmire for the USSR. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan increased defense spending and adopted a hardline stance, but he also negotiated with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev introduced reforms like glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. In 1989, revolutions swept through Eastern Europe. The Berlin Wall fell, and by 1991 the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War had ended. The Cold War shaped the modern world. It influenced military strategies, spawned technological innovations, and altered global alliances. Though it never erupted into full-scale war, its legacy continues to impact international relations today. Thanks for watching History Recapped. Be sure to like, subscribe, and join us next time as we explore another turning point in human history.